Good afternoon, everyone. For this slightly earlier than usual February 19th IEEE-USA Legislative Update. I'm Russ Harrison from Washington, D.C., and we'll get right into things. I'd originally titled this particular presentation "The Calm Before the Storm" because for the last 2 weeks, Washington has been focusing on other things and just sort of getting organized and ready to start the real work for the year. But then we went ahead and had a storm. And as I'm sure most of you are aware, a big storm hit pretty much the entire center of the country, but particularly Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and kind of the southern part of the central United States. At one point, over 1 million people were without power. That number is dramatically less, but there are still some people without power. And I'm bringing this up because the issue is going to raise issues that the storm rather is going to raise issues that IEEE-USA and IEEE members have a great deal to say about. Currently, Republicans are saying the crisis, particularly in Texas, was caused by failure of alternative energy, particularly wind energy. Democrats are saying it's a failure of the Texas electric grid and of planning in Texas. We'll let them sort all that out. The point is, IEEE-USA has things to say about how to build electric grids to make them more resilient and to help them survive extreme weather events like this. And one of the roles that we play in Washington is putting, in this case, power engineers in front of policymakers to say, effectively, when you're all done fighting and you actually want to fix the problem, here's what you need to do. And that's what we're going to be doing. And coincidentally, we have a new white paper out from the IEEE-USA Energy Policy Committee, Building an Intelligent Electric Grid. The report focuses on ways to strengthen electric grids, make them more resilient, make them more sustainable, and includes specific comments on surviving extreme weather events, not just giant Arctic storms, but any other electric weather events that could affect the electrical grid. And if you're interested in seeing that or any of our white papers, you can go to IEEEUSA.org/advocacy/white papers. And it's right there at the top. Second big thing that happened this week, the second beginning of a storm, is that President Biden's giant comprehensive immigration reform bill was dropped. If you're interested, this is what it looks like. It is 350 something pages, double spaced, of dense legal text. So all of you are interested, you're welcome to download it and read it yourself. However, I've read the parts of it that we care about for you. Most of the bill is about unskilled labor, undocumented workers, amnesty programs, those sort of things that you would expect Congress to be focusing on. IEEE-USA doesn't care about any of those. And so I haven't actually read those parts of the bill yet. But there is some very good language in the bill on high-skill immigration and high-skill visas. These are the process the United States uses to let people into this country based on those individuals' skills and education. Most of that text is focusing on the EB Green Card program, which is good. Green cards, as some of you are aware, are what are needed usually to become an American citizen. When you get a green card, you are a permanent legal resident of the United States. That's the definition. Permanent legal residents have green cards. And 5 to 7 years later, you can petition for full citizenship. For almost all IEEE members or IEEE eligible members, it's going to be a 5-year wait. And so the green card is the ticket to citizenship. EB visas are the primary employment-based green card that would be used by IEEE members to become American citizens. So this is the visa program we care the most about. What the Comprehensive Immigration Reform Bill does is it increases the EB visa cap from 160,000 to 170,000, which is good. Also recaptures unused visas. So any green cards, any EB green cards that were not used from 1992 to today, 1992 was when the last major immigration reform bill was passed, are eligible to be used now. Every year, some visas aren't issued just because of bureaucratic delays and paperwork problems or whatever. So you add those up, it comes up to be 500,000-ish visas. The exact number is debated by lots of people, but it's a lot. What those recaptured visas will be able to do, they will go first to anybody who's waiting in line for a green card. These are people who are in this country already, typically, who have been working in some cases over a decade in this country, but they haven't been able to get a green card because they're not available. This will clean out a lot of that backlog, allowing people to move through the EB green card process more quickly and in a more reasonable amount of time, which we think is great. There is an uncapped exemption, a new uncapped exemption from the EB program for individuals that earn a PhD in a STEM field from an American university. There's some quirks to the language that need to be ironed out, but that's generally a good thing. IEEE-USA would like that to be expanded to, it probably needs to be capped just for political reasons, but also to include master's degree students, since for many engineers, the master is the terminal degree, not the PhD. There's another exemption from the EB cap for people who have been waiting in line for an EB for more than 10 years. Again, these are people in the United States who are working, typically on an H-1B, although sometimes some other visas. But because of the backlog in the EB program, it can take well more than a decade to get one of the visas. And so Congress is saying, okay, just forget it. If you've been waiting in line 2 years, that's long, 10 years rather, that's long enough. We'll give you a green card. Again, cleaning out the backlog, allowing the process to kind of start moving at a reasonable rate of speed again. The country caps that we discussed a great deal last year will be eliminated. There's a reduction, interestingly, in the EB-5 visa category. Now, EB-5s, there are 5 types of EBs, cleverly named 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. 1, 2, and 3 are roughly equivalent to people who have PhDs, master's degrees, or bachelor's degrees, although they're not exactly that. That's a simple way of thinking about it. EB-4s are for religious workers, and EB-5 are for entrepreneurs. Not really. The way the EB-5 works is if you're willing to spend a certain amount of money, more than $500,000, on a business in the United States, and you jump through a few other hoops, you can get a green card. The practical use of this visa typically is more about very wealthy foreigners buying a green card than actual entrepreneurs getting a green card so they can start a company. You really need just a regular old a green card before you start trying to found your company, not beforehand. So the EB-5 never really worked very well anyway. Those visas will now be available in the 1 through 3 categories for typically graduates of American universities, which we think is a much better use of the visa. There's a weird little provision in there that says EB visas can be restricted, so we won't issue them to people in areas experiencing unemployment. And that's either a geographic area or a profession. The language is really weird, and so it's going to need to be tightened up. What is unreasonable unemployment? But it's in there, and we'll be talking to people about it. But overall, the result of this one piece of the bill will be roughly 1 million new EB green cards for skilled workers. Now, that's not 1 million every year from now on. There's a big bubble of visas available because of the recapture and the 10-year wait exemption that will clean people out of the backlog, which is roughly 1 million people. And then the total number will sink. The cap is 170,000. The PhD exemption, you're talking to maybe 10,000 there, a little more. And then with the other exemptions and little quirks in the law, you're looking at somewhere around 200,000 EB visas a year, which is a nice increase over where we are now. When you eliminate the backlog, it should, the numbers are a little squishy, allow people to move through the system in a couple years instead of a decade or two, which is better. Some of the other provisions, the interesting thing about the bill is there's very little on H-1Bs in there. And, we want H-1B reforms. There will be an H-1B reform introduced by Senator Durbin and Grassley sometime in the next month or two. But I expected a little bit in this bill, looking particularly to give things to the tech sector on H-1B, and that's not in there. There's a couple things on H-1Bs. The most important is specific legal permission to the administration to allocate H-1Bs based on wages. It would empower the regulatory change that President Trump made at the very end of his presidency. That's a rule change that IEEE-USA supported, but has been put on hold by President Biden. The Biden administration is now telling people they can't move forward with that regulation because the president doesn't have the authority to do it. It can't be done through regulation. It has to be done through law. So the Comprehensive Immigration Reform Bill has the law that would allow the president to do it, which is a good thing. The Immigration Reform Bill also makes student visas dual intent. That means international students will be allowed, to start applying for a green card while they're getting their education instead of having to wait to the end, which is a good thing. The O visa category would be increased from 10,000 to 40,000. O visas are known as the Nobel visas. They're really, really impressive people visas. They're also used by professional athletes, which is a good thing. I mean, the standards for getting one of these things aren't getting any lower. And so it's still going to be hard to get one, but this will ensure that any of the really impressive people that want to immigrate will be allowed to. These are used typically by mid or late career people because you have to have accomplished things, unless you're an athlete or an entertainer. You have to have accomplished things over the course of a career to qualify. But for those folks, this will be available and will be easier to use. An important change to the H-1B program, the two changes. The first one is the comprehensive immigration reform would mean that children of H-1B workers would not age out of the system. If you get an H-1B visa, you come to this country to work, your spouse and children are allowed to come with you, but only until the children turn 18, which is a real problem when it takes a decade to go from an H-1B to a green card. We have situations right now because it can take 15 or 20 years to get a green card. For some people, particularly people from India. Children that came to this country on an H-1B when they were 2 or 3 years old are now being told they have to go back to a country they don't remember while their parents stay here. It's not really good. The new rule would say you don't age out, you can stay until the person with the H-1B gets a decision on the green card. And I think there's the final age out date of when you turn 26, not 18, which seems reasonable because then you're an adult. Also, the bill would give the children and spouses of H-1B workers permission to work on an H-4 visa. There was a regulatory attempt to do this under the Obama administration that kind of didn't work. IEEE-USA expressed concerns about this simply because it locks H-1B workers even more tightly to their employer, because the spouse and children can only work so long as the H-1B worker is allowed to work, which they can only do so long as they have an H-1B. Better if they had a green card, but we have reforms to green cards, so this change isn't nearly as bad as it was previously. So then the question is, what is going to happen to all of this? And we know that there will be a lot of yelling and screaming about it, but the Democrats in Congress and even in the Biden administration are already indicating that they don't expect it to pass. And they are setting it up for them to take this very, very large bill and break it into little tiny pieces. This is exactly what the Democrats didn't do in 2013. Well, what Congress didn't do in 2013 when they tried to move a comprehensive reform bill and said it has to be comprehensive or nothing. Well, it was nothing. And since that was 9 years ago, they're trying something else now, 8 years ago, I guess. And so the plan then is that this bill will move in Congress and it will fail. Congress will then break it up into little pieces and then try to move the little pieces independently. That is IEEE-USA has always thought that was the more likely way to move. Instead of doing it in all one big chunk, you do little stepping stones that help you move towards getting things passed. And the benefit of that is, in order for the big bill to pass, you have to find a political coalition on Capitol Hill that agrees to everything. And that's probably not going to happen because various legislators have problems with various parts of the bill. If you break it into pieces, though, you can move each piece using a slightly different political coalition. So some legislators won't vote for comprehensive because they disagree with the family-based language, but they support the Dreamer bill. And so they'll vote for the Dreamer bill, but against the family-based bill. But you can get somebody else who will vote for the family-based bill, but against the Dreamer bill. And so you create different coalitions that allow all of these various pieces, or at least some of these pieces, to pass. That's the theory, and it seems more likely than the comprehensive approach. Congressional leaders have already indicated they're going to start with the Dreamer bill. These are children, illegal, undocumented individuals who came to this country as children. That bill legalizing them will come first. General amnesty for undocumented individuals will come second, with possibly an amnesty bill, either as part of that or independently. We also know that there will be an opportunity to move a high-skill bill later in this Congress. The question is, when will there be a high-skill bill? If the high-skill bill begins to move, middle September, maybe October of this year, we have a good shot of getting it done. If it doesn't start to move until next year, well, it's probably too late to get it done. And so we will be pushing Congress to make some small changes to the high-skill part of this bill, but also to start moving a high-skill immigration reform bill sooner rather than later. Congress is supposed to work on their big COVID relief bill in March. They hope to get it passed roughly the same time they passed the CARE Act in March of last year. A bill is moving forward, going through the budget reconciliation process. The implication of that is that Democrats do not need a single Republican to vote for a bill that moves through budget reconciliation, which this bill is. They would like the support, but they don't need it. Right now, this is what the COVID relief bill looks like. We're at $1,400 per person for stimulus check, phasing out after you pass $75,000 in income for an individual or $150,000 in income for a married couple. There's $350 billion in state and local aid, most of which will be focused on responding to COVID. You expanded earned income tax, expanded child tax credit, increased child and dependent care tax credit, extended unemployment retention tax credit, that is, companies that don't lay off their workers get a break on their taxes, and a $15 minimum wage that will phase in between when the bill passes and 2025. Now, the $15 minimum wage we'll have to watch this, but it probably can't move through budget reconciliation under current Senate rules. The Biden administration has already indicated they think that's the case. A number of senators have said they think that's the case, including Democratic senators. The thing is, though, the Democrats could change the budget reconciliation rules to allow provisions like this through. A couple Democrats have said they don't want to do that, so it's not clear that they have the votes. But that's the first test of this bill that we're going to be watching, is what happens to the minimum wage provision. My guess is that it gets dropped, and that Democrats try to pass it some other time. But I don't think it will be included in the COVID relief bill, but I could be wrong. We'll have to see. So we talked last time about the PRO Act. This is the union organizing bill that includes the ABC test. ABC test is used to determine if someone is an independent contractor or an employee. It has pretty big implications for IEEE members who are consultants, particularly if they're independent consultants. The ABC test was put into law a year and a half ago in California. It has caused our members problems. Had a conversation with House staff about the PRO Act last week, 2 weeks ago now actually, and was asked, what about Massachusetts? And the issue there is that Massachusetts has had an ABC test on the books for longer than any other state. Congressional staff wanted to know, how has that played out? What impact has it had? How has it hurt or helped people? So I spent the last couple of weeks reaching out to IEEE members in Massachusetts, consultants, and asking them what's going on. The first thing we quickly learned is that there appears to have been no enforcement cases brought because of the ABC test against companies employing engineers in Massachusetts. So it hasn't caused actual legal problems, which is not too surprising. Massachusetts has said, and has in fact done, that they will not enforce the ABC test unless someone complains. And since most technologists in Massachusetts who are consultants want to be consultants, not employees, it's not surprising there wasn't a complaint. But Further conversations with IEEE members have shown that consultants in Massachusetts have in fact done some things to adjust to the ABC test. A couple of guys I talked to said they only take out-of-state clients. That's not necessarily because of ABC, but it means ABC doesn't apply to them. A number of our members simply incorporated. They incorporated as a company of one person. Interestingly, in Massachusetts, partnerships and sole proprietorships don't get exempted from ABC, so you have to incorporate. But if you do incorporate, seems like you're off the hook. A number of members who are consultants decided to join consulting companies instead of doing it on their own. A couple guys said they've just moved to New Hampshire, which apparently is better. But the biggest implication here for consultants in Massachusetts seems to be on new consultants, particularly individuals who have been working for a long time as a regular employee and wish to become consultants. That transition is made harder because of ABC. The issue here is if you are a company and you're thinking about hiring a consultant and you have an individual who has been a consultant for 20 years, he's worked for dozens of companies, you can be pretty confident that that individual wants to be a consultant, not an employee, so you don't have to worry about them complaining about not being designated an employee under the ABC test, and thus you can hire them with a certain amount of confidence. If, however, you have an individual who's either just starting their career or who has had a career as a regular employee of a company, and they're now trying to transition to a consultant, it's much riskier to hire them because you're not sure they won't use the contract to trigger the ABC test to classify themselves as an employee. And so what seems to be happening is companies are hesitant to hire new consultants, which means if you want to get into the consulting business, you have to either leave the state or work for a consulting company. There's nothing inherently wrong with that, but of course, if that's not what you want to do, that's not what you wanted to do. So that seems to be what's going on in Massachusetts. Any IEEE members in other states, New Jersey, New York, ironically New Hampshire, which does have an ABC test, but hasn't apparently ever used it, or any of the other states with an ABC test, if you have experiences or have adjusted your work world to accommodate the ABC test, I really would love to hear about it. Just an update on something I told you about last time. Virginia is very close to passing its own digital privacy law. It passed the House earlier this week and is expected to pass the Senate next week. And Governor Northam of Virginia is expected to sign it into law. So then that would bring us up to 4 states that have digital privacy laws. 2 of them aren't terribly strong, but the California law and now the Virginia law actually would put pretty tight constraints on companies. And it'll be interesting to see how companies respond. The Virginia law is not the same as the California law. And so complying with 2 different state laws in the cyber world is going to be tricky and interesting to watch. Something else we're watching, Congress appears to be setting themselves up to do a real push an antitrust investigation into the tech companies, which could result in a number of things, one of which theoretically could be breaking up Microsoft, Google, Facebook, some of the other big tech companies. The House Judiciary Committee's Antitrust Subcommittee will have hearings starting on February 25th next week. Congressman Cicilline from Rhode Island will be leading that effort. And Senator Klobuchar from Minnesota will be doing something similar. She is not yet the chair of the Senate Antitrust Subcommittee because the subcommittee chairs haven't been named yet. But once she is, she's already made it clear that she intends to start doing an investigation in this area. IEEE-USA doesn't necessarily have a position on this, but we are watching it because the fallout from these investigations and anything that comes from them could obviously have a fairly profound impact on our members, good and bad, depending on what exactly happens. Reminder to everyone that registration is still open for another week for our CVVD. We currently have over 130 registrants for the CVD coming from over 30 states. We have somewhere around 30 to 40% of Congress currently covered. But if you have not yet registered, please do so. We always need more people, and numbers always matter in politics. Registration, IEEEUSA.org/CVD. Would love to have you join us. Next update is March 5th, a very important date in American history. That is the anniversary of the Boston Massacre. Not important to this conversation anyway, but I thought was just interesting. Before we open things up to questions, and if you do have questions, please go ahead and put them in your chat box on your screen. I'm Russ Harrison, Director of Government Relations for IEEE-USA in Washington, D.C. My direct phone number is 202-530-8326. Email address is r.t.harrison@ieee.org. If you have any questions about what we talked about today or anything that comes up between now and March 5th, please feel free to reach out and give me a call. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see your questions. There we go. Brendan Godfrey asks an interesting question. What do you think of Facebook ads that it favors regulation? I'm not, to be honest with you, I'm not on Facebook very much, so I don't know specifically what regulations the ads are referring to. I do know that the tech companies, interestingly, have not said anything that I know of, publicly about the high-skill immigration reforms in the comprehensive bill. They have talked about the Dreamer provisions and the bill kind of in general terms, and they're supportive of it. I will also point out that it is a general rule of thumb that big companies complain endlessly about regulations, but what they really complain about is regulations that they don't write. Regulations can often be used to squeeze competition out of the marketplace because smaller companies have a harder time complying. And so it would not surprise me if the big tech companies were in favor of some regulation because they see it as a way of protecting themselves from startup companies. Additionally, the tech companies are under a lot of pressure here in Washington. I'm going to talk about this more next time. There's a lot of things that are just getting started. But I mentioned in previous updates, the tech companies have successfully, seriously pissed off both parties. What they've done, though, is they've irritated both parties in entirely different ways, which at the moment are kind of balancing themselves. And so Congress hasn't been able to actually act on their anger. Oh, interesting. So that they haven't been able to do anything about their anger yet. That dam is going to burst at some point. And if both parties want new, fairly strict regulations placed on tech companies and social media companies, eventually those regulations are going to come. And so the tech companies, I think, are scrambling a little bit to say, we're in favor of these relatively small regulations as a defensive action against these really big regulations that are being talked about in Congress. And the tech companies, the big tech companies, are profitable enough that they can handle some regulation. They just can't handle all of it. And so I think that's what's going on. All right. Hey, Keith, good to see you. With that, I don't see any other questions. As I said, feel free to reach out if there's anything else that comes up over the next 2 weeks or you think of something later on today. My direct phone number is 202-530-8326. Email address is r.t.harrison@ieee.org. And with that, until March 5th, I hope everyone survives our exciting winter. Thank you for joining us this afternoon and have a good week. Take care.
I am trying to build a sustainable electronics industry. The things that we have just don't last as long as they used to, but they could. Every time a new gizmo comes out, we take it apart, find out what makes it tick. We need more engineers in the world. Engineers make the world better. They are designing the systems that keep the world working. So that's why I've been involved with IEEE-USA, is I want to see more kids get excited about engineering. We are working with IEEE-USA to create a world where repair is normal again.